Hi everybody, this is Eugene O'Loughlin, lecturing computing at the National College of Ireland, and welcome to my series of short how-to videos. In this video, we're going to learn how to calculate the mean and standard deviation of a set of data in Excel 2010. So first of all, let's take a look at some sample data. I've got two groups of data here. These data are actually height in centimetres of people within two different groups. And I'd like to be able to compare these two groups by using the mean and the standard deviation for each group. So before we go ahead and calculate these, let's make sure we understand exactly what these two terms, mean and standard deviation, stand for. So first of all, the mean is probably the easiest one. The mean is the result obtained by adding several quantities together and then dividing this total by the number n of quantities. In other words, we're calculating the average. So we take the numbers, add them all together, and divide them by the quantity within the data range. The standard deviation is a little bit different, and this tells us how much variation exists from the average. For example, a low standard deviation tells us that the data points tend to be very close to the mean. In other words, there isn't a very wide scatter of data. A high standard deviation, on the other hand, tells us that the data points are spread out over a large range of values. So if we want to compare the two sets of data, comparing the means and comparing the standard deviations are just about the simplest way of comparing two sets of data. So let's go ahead and calculate these figures. Now before we start doing this, we need to know how many values there are, a number of quantities n in each data range. Now I've got a very small data range here, and it will be very easy for me to just at a glance count these up and down, but I want to use an Excel function to do this. And the simplest way to do this is to use the count function. So in this cell here, B15, I'm going to type equals count, opening bracket, and what we need then is the data range. So I'm going to select with my mouse cells B2 down to cell B11, and press the closing bracket, click on enter, and this tells me that the number n in group A is 10. That means I've got 10 values in group A. Let me do a similar count for group B. So this is equal to the count, opening bracket, and I'm going to select my data range with my mouse. This is range C2 to C14 in this case. Closing bracket and press enter, and the count function is telling me that there are 13 values within data range group B. So that's very simple and straightforward so far using the count function. To calculate the mean, there are two ways to do this. Now we know if we add up all the numbers and divide by the total number of quantities, we will be able to calculate the mean or the average for that data range. So let's do that first, and that's quite simple using the sum function. So type in equals sum, S-U-M, and opening bracket, select my data range, which is B2 to B11 in this case, closing bracket, and I need to divide it by the number of quantities. Now I could type in the number 10 here, but let's use a cell reference instead, and the cell reference I need here is cell B15, which contains the value n, and press enter. So my mean or average value for the values in group A is 163 centimetres. A second way to do this is to use the average function. So let's delete this. Keep that number in mind, 163 there. So I'm going to delete this number, and this time I'm going to calculate the average a little bit easier by using the average function. So that's straightforward to use. So type in equals and type in the word average, and then opening bracket, and all I've got to do then is to select the data range, B2 to B11 in this case, and closing bracket, and this time I don't need to divide by any numbers because Excel can figure out how many values there are in that data range. So all I got to do here is press enter, and it gives me a result of 163, which is the same result I got from doing the more manual, slightly longer calculation. So this is a good simple way to calculate the mean. Let's do the same for group B. So type in equals average, opening bracket, select the data range C2 to C14 in this case, closing bracket, and press enter. And my average or mean value for group B is 181.2. So I can compare my two groups and say that the average height of people in group A is 163 centimetres, and the average height of people in group B is 181.2 centimetres. So there's quite a bit of difference there in height between the two groups. We also want to take a look at the standard deviation as well. How much does the data vary from the average? And let's do this for group A first of all. And for this we need another Excel function, and this function is the standard deviation function, which is abbreviated to the word STDEV. So let's type that in. So equals STDEV, opening bracket, and simply select the data range here, so that's cells B2 to B11 once again, and closing bracket, and press enter. And this tells us that my standard deviation for this case here is a value of 8.4. Let's do the same for the data in group B. Equals STDEV, opening bracket, select the data range, I'm doing this with my mouse all the time here, and closing bracket, no need to divide by any number at all. Excel figures out the number of values in this. Press enter, and we can see that my standard deviation for group B is 5.7. So by comparing the two groups, I can say, for example, that group A has a mean of 163 plus or minus a standard deviation of 8.4. And group B has a mean or average of 181.2 plus or minus a standard deviation of 5.7. And you can see that there's no overlap between those two sets of figures, so the two groups of data are different, and so you can use your mean and your standard deviation as part of your data analysis to tell us that these two groups of data are quite different from one another. Now if you want to go ahead and see if this difference is statistically significant, you need to use some other tests such as t-tests or analysis of variance tests, but for now we can use the mean and the standard deviation to tell us how different these two sets of data are. So that's how you calculate a mean and standard deviation of a set of data in Excel 2010. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you for your attention.